Do you love spy books, movies, and TV? Then the Spybrary podcast is for you. Since 2017, host Shane Whaley and Spybrary field agents around the world dispatch reviews and interviews with authors, historians, and fellow spy fans. We discuss everything from John le Carré, Len Dayton, Paul Viddich, Graham Greene, Mick Herron, Charles Cumming, Ben McIntyre, and many more. Spybrary is available on all good podcast apps and at spybrary.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 216 of the Spybrary podcast. Today we bring you a spy author interview. It's a debut novelist. Her name is I.S. Berry, and she has written The Peacock and the Sparrow. Now, the reason I couldn't wait to chat with Ilana is, first of all, I read the book and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's gritty, it's realistic, it's the exact type of spy book that I love. And in our Spybrary community, when you read people like Matthew Bradford, who, let's face it, is a walking encyclopedia when it comes to spy fiction, and Jason King, and they're both raving about it, and then Steve Ritterman is also raving about it, then you know this is something special. It reminds me of the time when David McCloskey's Damascus Station came out, when suddenly everyone I knew who enjoys reading spy lit is like, you've got to get on this one. So there's something special happening here. We joke a little bit in this conversation about, is the CIA a front for a writing school? Because of course McCloskey was CIA. I.S. Berry spent 6 years in the CIA. She was actually in Baghdad and Bahrain, and she worked in intelligence before that as well. So she definitely brings them. It's dripping in authenticity. Listen to this blurb. During the Arab Spring, an American spy's final mission goes dangerously awry in this explosive, bold, and eerily realistic debut from a former CIA officer who brings a fresh spin to the classic espionage novel. I'm in, right? Irregardless of Bradford, King, Ritterman, and others. If I'd read that blurb in a bookshop, I would be right. I'm taking this to the till. I'm buying it. Let me share a little bit more about the book so we can set the scene prior to our conversation. Shane Collins, a world-weary CIA spy, is ready to come in from the cold. Stationed in Bahrain off the coast of Saudi Arabia for his final tour, he has little use for his mission, uncovering Iranian support for the insurgency against the monarchy. He certainly has no use for his naive and ambitious 28-year-old station chief. Then Collins meets Almiza, a beautiful and enigmatic artist, and his eyes are open to a side of Bahrain most expats never experience, to questions he never thought to ask. When his trusted informant inside the opposition becomes embroiled in a murder, Collins finds himself drawn deep into the conflict, his growing romance with Almiza and his loyalties upended. In an instant, he's caught in the crosswinds of a revolution. Drawing on all his skills as a spy master, he must navigate a bloody uprising, earn Almiza's love, and uncover the murky border where Bahrain's secrets end and America's begin. A superbly accomplished modern spy novel dripping with authenticity, The Peacock and the Sparrow explores the elusive truth, the power of love and belief, and the universal desire to be part of a cause greater than oneself. Excited to bring you this conversation. Show notes can be found at spybrary.com/216. Don't forget to come join us in our Spybrary community. Ilana, the author of this wonderful book, is a member of the community, and I'm sure she'll be open to answering any questions that I didn't get to on this 45-minute or so conversation. But without further ado, let's cross over to I.S. Berry. Welcome to Spybrary, I.S. Berry. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute delight. I've said this on social media. I'm out there in public saying this, that your book, The Peacock and the Sparrow, is the best spy book I have read that was published this year, 2023.
Thank you so much. Honestly, that's such a compliment. Thank you.
Well, thank you for keeping me entertained. I shared with you at the time that I had to go into hospital for some pretty horrible surgery. Yeah. And my recovery was reading your book and Mick Smith's book on the real special relationship. So you helped me forget about the pain and all the stuff to do with recovery. Before we get into your book and your writing, I just wanted to read a couple of reviews that were posted in our Spybrary community about your book. So Bruce Dravis wrote, "Thanks so much to Spybrary for pointing this one out. deceptively captivating. And by the time I got to the end, I was thinking, what did I just read? An unlikable narrator whose professional and personal lives are in a shambles and slides downhill. The author definitely held back her cards from the reader. And by the time I realized what was happening, I had to speed to the end. Left me thinking of Alec Lemus. And then Matthew Bradford from the 00 Section blog wrote, "This is a really great book that successfully follows in the footsteps of Green and Le Carre, but should also please fans of Jason Matthews and David McCloskey. There is action, there is betrayal, and there are the worst of human impulses laid bare, all beautifully described. I.S. Berry is a welcome new voice in the genre and should find a lot of fans in Spybrary." How does that make you feel as a debut novelist?
You have no idea. I mean, I feel like your community got my book, which was, it wasn't supposed to be a shiny, slick spy novel. You know, we have plenty of those out in the world. Spies chasing down people in cars and scaling roofs and wearing tuxedos. And I set out to write the most realistic spy novel I could. I didn't know how it would land. I didn't know if people would get that. And I didn't write a particularly likable character, and not everyone likes that. So that just means the world to me, that feedback. And I personally love Graham Greene. I mean, I feel like any comparison to Graham Greene is crazy in my book because I feel like he stands above all others. So that's such a huge compliment. I mean, when I read The Quiet American, I reread it occasionally. I read it and I feel so inadequate as a writer because I think it just stands on a plane above all others.
Well, you're definitely not inadequate as a writer. As you're going to hear throughout this conversation, most of us Spybrarians thoroughly enjoyed the book. And not just us, Joseph Cannon, David McCloskey, Paul Vidic, all raving about your book as well. So it's not just our wee community, it's some accomplished writers giving you these compliments too.
Thank you. It means so much to me.
And thank you for writing a realistic, gritty spy novel, because they're my favorite.
Me too.
The listeners know that I'm not really into the, Kalashnikov kid style. I recognize that they are loved by a lot of readers, not particularly my cup of tea. I want to read about a spy who uses their cunning and their guile and their wit to get out of situations or to get intel, not necessarily storm it in with an AK-47 and a Yeti coffee cup. But moving fast on, what inspired you to write the story? And where did you first get the idea for the book?
So I think really I wanted to write a book that captured my experiences as a spy, which were not so good. I mean, it's a business where you manipulate people and you're being manipulated. And I really wanted a book that would capture that. For the setting, I lived in Bahrain during the Arab Spring for 2 years. And that was where I kind of had the idea. It was such an interesting, multifaceted, complex conflict where there was no clear right side. You have the Saudis backing the monarchy, and you have Iran to some degree backing the revolutionaries. And in so many ways, it reminded me of Vietnam and the proxy war of Vietnam. And also The Quiet American, which is one of my favorite books. So in a way, it was sort of me reimagining The Quiet American. I know one of the members of your community had caught on to that and said, it's like a reimagining. And it was really.
Yeah.
So it was sort of the combination of me kind of years of thinking I really want to write about my experiences as a spy. They really stayed with me, and certain operations in particular stayed with me. And not really knowing, though, the best way to do it. And then when I lived in Bahrain and witnessed the Arab Spring, I thought this is the setting for me.
And my geography is not bad. I've traveled around the world, etc. But I must confess that I had to go to the atlas to see where Bahrain actually was. It's one of those countries that I know about, but I couldn't put it on a map. And then seeing how close it is to Saudi Arabia and that whole area, it made a lot more sense to me knowing geographically where it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small country. Not a lot of people know about it. And that was sort of intriguing to me, too, that sometimes, cataclysmic events start in a small corner of the world.
Yeah. What I also liked was the two contrasting worlds of the diplomatic staff, shall we say, the government staff, and then what life is like as a local living in Bahrain. Yeah,
absolutely. And I was a member of the expat community when I was there. So that was really taken from my own experiences, and even some of the dialogue was taken directly from things I heard. It's kind of a bubble, like an elitist, a very elite privileged community. It's a stark contrast with these impoverished masses that live there. And for me, the Arab Spring is really about contrast, about wealth and poverty, about different religions. I mean, there's so many fissures in the Arab Spring.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really interesting to see that contrast of where the diplomatic staff were living in these big houses with all the mod cons and luxuries. And then when you see where Rashid is living, we'll get on to him later on, in the areas of where the locals are. And then I liked it because then I got to understand a little bit more about some of the resentment towards the royal family. And, for me, it wasn't just political in a sense of, no, I guess there was a fight against oppression, but also living standards. When you see the king and his opulence, and then you've got the locals who are struggling, living in shacks. Yeah.
And that was all taken from my experiences there. And it was a little bit distasteful to me how a lot of the expats, they would live in their big homes, and they loved that. And they loved having a live-in maid, and they would have their cosmetic surgery, their medical tourism. And they kind of adopted the habits of the ruling class to some degree. And I found that really interesting. And I think you see it throughout history in a lot of different countries where the US has a presence. And I think I have some references in my book to the Majestic in Vietnam or the Elphinstone Club in India. I mean, you kind of see that pattern of just this sort of sense of superiority when the West comes into these countries.
Absolutely. Jason King, one of our Spybrarians, wrote, "One of the many things I loved about this book was the way IS captures the expat life. At the beginning of chapter 6, her hero, Shane Collins, comments, the gala marked my 3-month anniversary in Bahrain. 3 months, a turning point as any expat knows, the entrance to a long dark tunnel, the point where any extant novelty or exotism has worn off, where you sink deeper into foreign soil, but it repulses and rejects you, shuns your alien roots, where you become trapped in the amber of the transplanted elite, imprisoned in a no man's land."
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I've lived abroad quite a bit. I think you've lived in different countries too.
Yeah.
I mean, I lived in Prague, I lived in Poland, lived in England for a while. And I feel like it's that feeling. It is kind of like a no man's land feeling, I think. At first you're like, oh, this is so exciting, this new world. And then after a while, it kind of wears off and you're not really sure who you are and where you belong exactly. But to me, it was also reflective of your feeling as a spy when you're sort of, you're in these foreign countries, you're trying to be immersed, you're trying to understand them, and yet you're an outsider. And it's interesting too, because I think as a spy, you want to be part of the community, of the culture, and understand it. But at the same time, you're working against it. You're trying to penetrate different communities within the country. So it's a lot of dichotomies.
So Shane Collins, great name for a spy, by the way.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Do you like the name Shane? I think it's the first Shane I've come across who's a spy. Why is he in Bahrain? What's he doing? Why is he being sent there?
Yeah, so it's his final tour. And as we said, it's sort of an unimportant country. He kind of is just there to bide his time before retiring. And he's tasked with finding out about Iranian support for the revolution. And at the outset, he thinks this is ridiculous. This is just Western wishes, Western hopes that there's this big conspiracy behind the revolution, that Iran's behind it. And he doesn't think there's much evidence. He's trying to penetrate the opposition. He has one source who's not all that great, Rashid. And Rashid is really saying, no, there's nothing to that. Iran is really not behind the revolution. And Shane says, this is just overblown, typical US inflating a threat that's not there.
There's a great quote about Shane where you write, a worn beige leather couch that had survived all my overseas assignments, more durable than my marriage, a gilded upright globe my son had given me before he stopped talking to me, bookshelves filled with a few non-fictions, Arabic textbooks, the occasional Graham Greene and Le Carre, through which I'd futilely tried to make sense of my life choices. And quite a lot of us agreed. What we loved about your writing in this book is you didn't spend the first chapter describing Collins. You drip fed it. We were learning more about his background as we were getting more and more into the story. And I really enjoyed that technique.
Thank you. I mean, and I didn't do it consciously. It kind of just came out. This was my first book and I had no idea what I was doing. So yeah, and it's funny because I've started my second book and I'm asking myself these questions like, should I just tell the protagonist story at the outset or should I, now it's like things that I did kind of naturally with the first book. Now I'm having to ask myself, I look back to my first book and I think, well, what did I do? It kind of just came out that way.
But it worked. It was very effective. I really enjoyed being on that journey of discovering more about, his backstory and who he was as a person. And then there was another conversation with his boss and he says, they warned me about you, but I gave you a chance. Said you were dead weight, space filler, just biding your time until retirement. Collins, you have no idea how many times I've defended you. And okay, I have to be careful. I don't want to go into any spoiler strazas here, right? Yeah. I'm going to end there. But again, it's that description of him as a weary agent, a weary spy. You can say at the end of his tour, broken marriage, kid not talking to him, likes a drink. What did he say? Alcohol greases his brain. There was a line you wrote.
Yes. You remember so much of it. Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that honestly, like people ask me if that's realistic, and it is. I mean, to be honest, that was a big problem in the director of operations, alcohol and also divorce. I mean, they tell us at the outset during the orientation that 80% of case officers get divorced. That's what they told us. Yeah. So, I mean, that's pretty typical.
Yeah. And I mean, you read spy novels and also spy nonfiction. And I mean, just the pressure on agents working overseas and especially during episodes like the Arab Spring and so forth, the amount of pressure.
And also, I mean, I think what I tried to convey is just what a toll the job takes on you.
Yeah.
How debilitating it is. And that was my experience. I was not a spy for very long. I was a spy for 6 years. But I found it to be fairly debilitating in so many ways. And I mean, your whole job is to manipulate people, to convince them to do what's not in their interest, to betray their country or their family or their tribe. And you're being manipulated. They want more money or they're peddling information that's wrong. And I just think psychologically, it really takes a toll on you.
Yeah. There's a great passage where you wrote, seducing a woman was not unlike wooing an informant. You divine her wants and needs, decode her vulnerabilities, align yourself, sometimes work against her if friction's a thing, make yourself indispensable, fill the gaps and crevices. You do this until you know her better than yourself, better than she knows herself, until the only answer is yes. So again, going back to that whole, you have to manipulate people as a spy.
Right. And that's how he views the world. And every person, every informant, the woman he is after. I mean, it's all a game of manipulation and targeting for him. And I think that's how you kind of come to look at the world when you're a spy. I got a lot of criticism for that from some readers from that passage, though, because I think they felt like the protagonist was just a sleazy womanizer. And, my point in that passage was to show how espionage distorts you, how you start to look at everyone as a target, as a potential target.
Well, I thought that was a great paragraph because I think it really does kind of highlight the manipulation that goes on. I take it that the character here doesn't, well, let me ask you this, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but are you angry? Do you hate? Are you bitter towards double agents?
You mean like the one in the book?
Well,
is that
I just mean that when you say, well, the character is talking about having a special scorn for double agents.
Right. Do I personally have a special scorn as well?
Yeah, no, I wondered, was this you through the character or did it fit the character?
No, not really. No, I mean, I hadn't really thought much about it. That's a good question. I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so. But I think for me, it's hard enough just being a spy for one side.
Yeah.
I think people who can kind of play both sides, I feel like that takes a special psyche. I don't know. There's something really morally malleable about people like that. And I wouldn't put myself in that category. So I think there is something a little weird about it.
Yeah. There's also another paragraph that made me smile where you write, I'd even looked on exiled officers with a bit of envy. They'd officially and formally earned the enmity of an entire country, dug in their heels deep enough to make footprints.
Yeah. I mean, but that I feel like that I can relate to, because I think, there's a sense of futility throughout the book where he just so desperately wants to make something of his life and his career, which kind of culminates at the end. He's taking a stand. He's going to make a dent in the world, right? He's going to pick a side. So he does kind of have that feeling early on, like, if only he could be like these people who had made some kind of impact, even a bad one.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the cast. Let's talk about some of the characters. Who are some of your favorite characters in your book that you were writing about?
Ooh, I like all of them, but I guess I like Whitney, the station chief, who is the only one who's really based on a real person that I knew.
Right.
The rest are composites or just fictional. And also he was sort of based a little bit on Alden Pyle from The Quiet American.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I guess I had fun. I had a lot of fun with the expat characters. Oh, and those were based on real life as well. I'm probably going to get myself into trouble, but the chaplain's wife and just some of the other characters were sort of based on reality. Yeah.
Sure. Quoting from the book again, talking about Whitney Alden Mitchell, who became the youngest station chief in CIA history. A lively contrast with me, 25 years a case officer, never a station chief. My prior tour in Baghdad had been the latest in a multi-year descent, a descent made worse by the disappearance of a few $100. It's hard to like, Shane, isn't it?
It is, but I felt like he had some redeeming qualities. I think in his own way, he tries to do the right thing. And I think, he has this really unctuous, obnoxious station chief. I don't know, maybe just because I wrote the character, I felt like there were moments when I could empathize with Shane.
Yes. No, absolutely. And yes. I found myself rooting for him.
Yes.
Right throughout the book, even though he might not be the nicest person to be around. Right. And would I trust him around my wife?
Right, exactly.
Or my whiskey? But I'm rooting for him. I was rooting for him. What can you tell us about, and forgive me if I'm saying the name wrong, Almeza?
Yeah, Almeza.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so she's kind of a symbol. She's half British, half Iraqi. And she's a little bit of a symbol of the kind of conflict between East and West, which very much plays out in the book. And at the end, of course, you see what side she takes between East and West. And I won't give it away. Yeah. But I kind of wanted to embody that conflict and that tension in a character of East versus West. And also, not just that, but, her whole history, she has sort of an intergenerational trauma where her parents were imprisoned by Saddam Hussein, executed by Saddam Hussein. And again, I don't want to give anything away, but I kind of wanted to portray how trauma and sort of revolutions can be passed down through generations.
So the Tree of Life, does that exist?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right.
It's a major tourist. It's just like I described. It's major tourist attraction. It's in the location I described. And it's a little bit of a disappointment in person.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you go, it's one of the most storied sites in Bahrain. And you get there and it's kind of indistinctive. It's almost collapsing. And there are other trees around it. And It's supposed to be so singular. It's supposed to be, the only thing living for miles. And it's not.
Right. Okay.
But that was actually, I'm glad you asked about that, because that was actually a little bit of a symbol as well.
Yes.
Because Collins, it's sort of this illusion of exceptionalism, right? Like everyone thinks the Tree of Life is the only one of its kind, and it's not. And Collins kind of, I don't want to do any spoilers, but Collins kind of thinks he plays a unique role. He thinks that there's something really special about his role in the Arab Spring. And we'll see if that plays out at the end. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are you on the hunt for your next thrilling spy read? Look no further. Spybrary contributor and Sunday Times chief political commentator Tim Shipman has curated a list of his top 125 spy authors ranked. With Tim's vast experience and expertise in politics and spy thrillers, you can trust his judgment on the best spy authors of all time. This list includes both classic and modern writers, making it the ultimate guide for any spy fan. But wait, there's more. Tim also recommends which book to try first from each author, and he shares his favorite book from each of them too, so you can dive right into the best of the best. Ready to get your hands on Tim's list? Head over to spybrary.com/top125 to grab your free copy now. Don't miss out on the ultimate spy reading list. Visit spybrary.com/top125 today.
I want to go on some listener questions. So our friend Matthew Bradford is back in. And what I'll say about Matthew is the praise that he's given you. So Matthew, he's going to blush when I say this, but he is the one person I would call if I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and it's Top Friend and it's spy fiction or spy movies, because the man's a walking encyclopedia. He should be behind the mic, not me. He should be doing these episodes because he has so much knowledge. So when he is giving you these compliments, you know, he knows his spy stuff. So
amazing.
Heartfelt. And he asks, I'm curious about your relationship with The Quiet American. Had you read it already before you went to Bahrain, or did Bahrain make you think of it? Or did you read it while there? Did Green's book inspire you to write yours, or did you find the parallels with it as you were writing The Peacock and the Sparrow?
I mean, yes to all of those. Yes, I mean, I had read it a long time ago and it holds a place in my mind. Like, I just love every word in that book. I mean, it's just masterpiece from beginning to end. I have never read its equal ever. So that was always in my mind, like, wow, in a dream, maybe I could write something close to this, or this would inspire me. And then when I went to Bahrain, I realized the parallels. I realized how close the Arab Spring was to sort of how many parallels there were with like the Vietnam War and the Quiet American. And I thought, I'm going to take this as sort of my inspiration and go from there. And I did reread it. And there were so many direct parallels. I mean, right down to the station chief's name, Whitney Alden Mitchell. Alden is the name of the station chief in the Quiet American. But even some of the scenes, the scene, as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a scene where Alden Pyle dances with Thomas Fowler's lover, and Thomas Fowler, the seasoned British journalist, you know, gets really jealous watching young Alden Pyle dance with his woman. And I took that scene and put it in my book at the Marine Corps ball. Yeah. So there were a lot of, I mean, really direct inspirations.
Matthew also asks, you evoke your settings as vividly as Green does. Did you travel to all of them in your previous life, if you can say? If so, did you make notes for a potential novel while you were there, or did you write about them from memory after the fact? Did you return to any of these places whilst you were writing the book?
Thank you for the compliment, first of all, to him. So yes, I had traveled to Cambodia, and I wrote it right after I came back from Bahrain. So that part was pretty fresh in my memory, the Bahrain description. And the Cambodia was not as fresh. I had gone there maybe 10 years earlier, and I did not travel back to either country to write the book. So Cambodia was just from memory. Cambodia really resonated with me. I really loved that country. It just kind of captured me when I was there. So I think I just remembered places like Heart of Darkness. I had gone there. I mean, it was all taken from my memory. But when I was younger, I used to keep travel journals everywhere I went. I no longer do, but I think I just really absorbed places I go.
When did you first realize you had a talent for writing?
Oh, well, thank you. I always loved writing, even as a kid. And my teachers would like enroll me in writing contests. And I had like a poem published in high school, I think, in some literary journal. But I guess I never thought of it as a viable career, just because it's so hard to make a living as a writer. And I guess I took the practical course. Well, I was a spy. That's not so practical. But I was a lawyer by training. So I went to law school and I kind of went the practical route. But then I was a spy and then a writer. And I think writing about spying is a better fit for me than doing it.
Got it. Matthew also asks, what came to you first, your plot or your characters? Shane Collins is so well realized. Did you always intend to write him in the first person, or did that come during the process?
Yes, I had always intended to write in the first person, and it just kind of came naturally. I think it's the best way to just occupy a character. I find it hard to really get into a character's shoes if I'm writing in the third person. I think maybe I did try an early draft as in the third person, and I just couldn't get into it as much. I mean, I felt like because he's so unlikable, I think to make him relatable, I really had to just occupy him and understand all the good and bad. And what was the first part of the question? I forget the first part.
What came to you first, the plot or the characters?
I think about the same. They came about the same time. I mean, I think I had in my mind, I wanted an aging spy caught in the crosswinds of the Arab Spring, in this conflict where there was no clear right side. And he, at the end, was going to have to choose a side, much like the Quiet American. Thomas Fowler says, you should stay on the sidelines, don't get involved. And of course, at the end, he does get involved. So I had that in my mind. And I had an idea of who I wanted the character to be, but it definitely got more fleshed out, I think, as I wrote it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Mike Liddy asks, so other than Graham Greene, what spy authors have influenced your writing?
Yeah, so I have some kind of unusual inspirations, I think. I really love C.J. Kosh, The Year of Living Dangerously, which is not strictly a spy novel, although it has like an element of espionage in it. Have you read that book?
I have not. I mean,
it is like a literary masterpiece. I mean, I feel like it's kind of an unsung book. It's like from beginning to end. It takes place in 1960s Indonesia. And I love how he weaves real life events into this just beautiful, magnificent prose. And there are scenes in my book that pay homage to him, like tuk-tuks circling below hotel rooms. I mean, that was all from his book. And he has kind of an expat community in Indonesia, and they hang out at this bar, the Wei Yang bar. And that was sort of my inspiration for Trader Vic's in my book. So I love him. Joseph Cannon, who I think just so beautifully also weaves real life events and history. It makes the characters such reflections of the geopolitical context and circumstances. So definitely Joseph Cannon. Ian McEwan, I love. And I loved The Innocent. That's one of my favorite spy novels.
What did you like about that one so much?
What did I like about it? Again, I love that it's, it takes a real life thing, this tunnel, and weaves a fictional story around it. I mean, I thought that was just brilliant. I believe the name was Leonard Marnham was the character, and I found him to be really flawed.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's kind of naive. But there's like that one scene, if you remember, where he basically rapes his girlfriend,
Yep.
and, there might be some similarities in my book as well to that. But I mean, he's not like he's deeply flawed. And I'm a sucker for flawed characters. Bring on the flaws, because that's what I want to read about. I want to read messy, realistic characters.
Absolutely.
The other book that I feel like nobody has read is this really old book called The Informer by Liam O'Flaherty.
Okay.
He's Irish. It's masterful. I love the book. No one's ever read it. It's like about the 1920s Irish Civil War between the IRA and the provisional Irish government. And I don't know a lot about Irish politics, but you don't need to for the book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a great spy novel, and it's so gritty. And it's like something, it's something you could read today, and it's just terrific.
I also read the Ian McEwan book and really enjoyed it because I'm a big student of Berlin and Cold War Berlin. And I liked how they told the story. And I liked how George Blake even appears, talking of double agents.
Yes, right. Yes, you're right. Exactly.
It was one of his neighbors, which I thought was, that could make or break a novel, but it was done very, very well.
Agreed. And I think it's funny that you mentioned that, because in that story, you barely see him as a character until the very end, right?
Yeah.
And I think someone along the way criticized me. Someone criticized my book. If you remember one of the characters, Waleed, in my book, that he sort of lays low until, well, I won't give it away, but until the end. I mean, he's not a major character. And I think I kind of retorted with Ian McEwan with that example.
Yeah.
I was like, sometimes the best characters, they're really minor characters, and sometimes they play crucial roles, but they don't have to be on every page.
Now, there's a blog post we should write at Spybrary. Listeners, send in who are the minor characters who have a major impact on a novel and a spy novel. We should write that up.
And Crime and Punishment, that begins with the murder of someone, and the victim, the woman, she's hardly mentioned throughout the book. I mean, it's like the vortex of the story disappears. So,
have you read McEwan's other spy novel, Sweet Tooth?
So I read Sweet Tooth, and I didn't love it, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think someone mentioned this, right, in reference to my book, because he writes it from
I
a
haven't read
female.
it yet. It's my August read. So I bought it. I was in London, and that was good. But you authors, you're prolific. You're bringing out new books all the time, so I can't go back to the classics.
Yeah. Well, I won't spoil it for you. Then I don't want to spoil it.
I know it has mixed reactions. I'll say that. Back to listener questions. Then Jason King says, "Ask Ilana if the CIA is just a cover for a creative writing school. If so, I want to join. Also, were you the inspiration for the main character, and how did it feel writing in the first person as a man?" I think that first point, because David McCloskey, debut novel, was a bit like your book in a way, where it suddenly was appearing in my social media feed, and I'm like, okay, there's quite a few people raving about this, and then we promoted it in Spybrary, and then the next, it's one of those books, and I have a strong feeling yours is going to be in the same bracket, where, like we just said, for instance, you're like, I'm not keen on Sweet Tooth. Okay, fine, accept it.
Yeah.
But McCloskey's book, and I feel yours, certainly from what we're reading in the Spybrary community now, everyone's loving it. No one is like, didn't work for me. Like, everyone is like, oh, this is superb. What a great book. And you've kind of, both of you, former CIA. So I think that's what Jason is referring to here about a creative writing school.
I wish. I mean, I probably would have enjoyed that more than being a spy, but yeah, they do have a group, and they just reached out to me. I was so flattered, called Invisible Ink. It's a group of like aspiring writers within the agency.
Wow.
Yeah, I had never heard of them, but they reached out to me to see if I would come talk to them. And I was like, whoa, yeah, hello, that'd be great.
Are you listening to us, Invisible Ink? Are you listening to us? I hope so. And then his second question was, how did it feel writing in the first person as a man?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It felt fine. I mean, I felt like I said, I really felt like I empathized with Shane Collins. I think I like him more than most people do. And I think I would sit down at my computer and I would tune everything out. And it was really like I was just entering his world. Like I would just sit down and like, okay, I am Shane Collins. And there were times when I would write something and it would come out a little bland. And I'm like, no, that's not what Shane would say. It would come out as me, maybe, or as just a neutral narrator. And I would catch myself. And I really ran through my book with a fine-tooth comb. And every sentence was like, is this what Shane would say and think and narrate? I wanted to be totally consistent in his voice and how I portrayed him. And all the professions I'd been in, I worked for Department of Defense as an intelligence analyst before the CIA. And then at the CIA, I mean, they were really male-dominated professions. So I felt like I had a lot of material to draw from. Yeah.
Talking of the agency, did they need to vet this book? I know it's fiction, but did they still need to go through it?
Absolutely. I mean, till my dying day, anything I write, fiction or nonfiction, I have to submit prior to showing it to anyone. Their definition of publication is showing it to anyone. So I couldn't show it to an agent. I can't show it to my husband. Literally no one. So I sat in a coffee shop for 5 years writing in a vacuum, not knowing if it would be any good at all. And it could be total crap. And I just wasted 5 years of my life. And and then I submitted it to them, and it was actually wonderful. It was a breeze. I mean, they barely redacted any of it, and they got it back to me within a couple months. So and much different from nonfiction pieces I'd submitted in the past, which were harder to get through.
And you also talked about espionage, intelligence being a male-dominated world. It also seems in spy fiction, there are very few female writers. So how does that feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm proud of the fact that I'm one of the only women. And I don't know why, other than that I think there are so many men in the field. So, I mean, I'm proud of the fact, and I hope it doesn't dissuade readers from reading it.
If it does, stop listening to Spybrary and get out the because that's not what we're about. And I have to say, reading the book, unless, we'd spoken previously, of course, and you kindly sent me a copy of the book, but even if I didn't know your first name or you were, there's no way I could have told the gender of the writer, which I think is the biggest compliment I can give you.
Thank you.
Excellent. So, good question from Matthew there. I'm saying, what other characters have we not covered? Because there's quite a few in the book. Who else did you enjoy writing?
The Admiral, I enjoyed writing, which I don't want to give things away.
Yeah.
But I will say that some of what's in my book was taken from real life. Like there's sort of a partying, hedonistic lifestyle among the expats, including the naval community. And that was actually kind of ripped from the headlines. I mean, there was quite a big scandal in Bahrain, actually in the same neighborhood where I lived at the time, which was Amwaj Islands, same as Shane Collins. There was a scandal because this admiral was just throwing these wild parties with skinny dipping and all kinds of crazy things. And it was, like behavior unbecoming of an officer. So I was like, one of my early scenes in the book is this kind of big gala event at this farewell to summer party at the admiral's house. So that was kind of taken from real life.
Yeah.
That was fun to write. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I have to say, reading your book, and like I said, I was recovering from surgery, but all I wanted was a cocktail. There's a lot of drinking that goes on.
There's a lot of drinking. I know, right?
Like, I want one of them.
There's a lot. Yeah. It's kind of a hedonistic lifestyle among the expats.
Yeah. I can well imagine.
Yeah.
So tell us about the title. So the Peacock and the Sparrow. For those who haven't read the book yet, where does that come from?
So it's a reference to a parable in 1001 Arabian Nights. Basically, a peacock warns a sparrow not to stray too far from his nest, and he does not heed the advice, and he gets trapped by a net. And ultimately, it's kind of about the futility of trying to outrun your destiny, which was sort of a theme throughout the book, both among the characters, Collins is trying to outrun his destiny of just being a failed spy. He's trying to kind of make something of his life. And the Arab Spring, it's kind of like both sides, the Sunni on one side and the Shia on the other side. They both think it's their destiny to win the Arab Spring, to control Bahrain. And you don't really know who's right and who's going to fulfill their destiny. So that was sort of the thinking behind the title. And there's another layer of meaning, which I guess I can say without giving anything away. But basically, Collins realizes this toward the end. 1001 Arabian Nights, it's not so much about the stories. The framework for the stories is actually Scheherazade telling these stories, trying to stave off execution. And really, Collins has this revelation where it's really a story of manipulation. It's like Scheherazade trying to manipulate the king so he won't execute her. So it's sort of this revelation about that Shane gets. This is really about manipulation. The book is about manipulation, about who's manipulating whom. It
is. What do you hope readers take away from your book? Or how would you like them to feel, without revealing what happens at the end, of course? How do you want them to feel when they close the book, having read the final page?
Yeah, I think I really wanted to convey just the murk of espionage and sort of our post-Cold War world and the elusiveness of truth. And that was something I struggled with as a spy. And the fact that there aren't clear good guys or bad guys or right or wrong sides, as in so many spy novels. So I wanted readers to know this is sort of the real espionage in my experience.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that I felt I could relate to as a reader and the writer is, Collins, while not particularly likable, he's a middle-aged guy who comes to a point in his life where he realizes, he wants to do something. He wants to make a dent in the world. Maybe he succeeds, maybe he doesn't. You'll have to read, to find out. But he wants to make something of his life and career. And I felt like that was something I could relate to. I got to a point in my life where I'd wanted to write a book for a long time and I didn't know what the right story was. And I thought, now's the time. I'm not getting any younger. And so I hope readers can maybe relate to it that way too.
It's interesting with you saying that you worked in intelligence before joining the agency, because there was one quote where you wrote, "Intelligence officers are even worse than soldiers. At least soldiers have the courage to pull the trigger." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, true.
Okay, I won't push you on that. So
I was going to just say, I felt like I was in Baghdad for a year during the war, and there was just no comparing what we did with it was a dangerous job, but there were soldiers going outside the wire every day, and that was so. Yeah. Yeah,
debt to their service. You also wrote, "Espionage was a game, and if a spook wasn't playing, he was either irrelevant or dead." Love that.
Yeah.
As we wrap up our conversation, you mentioned earlier on that you are writing another book. Is that a sequel or is it completely different from
It's
Peacock and Sparrow?
standalone. I mean, the first one is Peacock and the Sparrow, I think, is standalone.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had never really envisioned a sequel. I don't know. I welcome your thoughts on it. But yeah, to me, it just stands alone. It has a definite ending. So yeah, my next book that I'm working on is a spy novel, and it has a female protagonist, but it is unrelated.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think you can return to Shane Collins. I think you need
Think
to bring him
so?
out of retirement at some point. I think, hey, if Le Carre can do that, how many years after doing Tinker Tailor and write Legacy of Spies, then I think you can do it, Ilana.
My agent said the same thing. Yeah, I'll have to think about it.
I mean, I think he's a great character. Yeah, like you say, with his
Yeah.
flaws, but it's how I imagine a tired officer to be, a spy to be towards the end of their career. So I think
Yeah.
it's very realistic.
Yeah. And some people have suggested a prequel as well.
Ah.
I hadn't thought of. So
And he would be based in Berlin, right?
maybe.
No. I love spy books set in Berlin. It's just
Yeah, no. It's a great city.
Where can people follow you online, Ilana?
They can follow me on my website is isberry.net, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram at isberryauthor. One word.
Brilliant. I will add all of those links to our show notes, which you can find at spybrary.com/216. Are there any questions you have? I know you've done quite a few interviews recently, which is great. Good to get the word out about the book. Are there any questions that you wish podcasters, bloggers, journalists, book fans had asked you that they haven't yet?
That's a good question. I don't know. I was going to say maybe what books other than spy novels that I liked. I don't know, just because people always ask me about spy novels.
Of course.
Spy novels that inspired me, but I actually was mostly inspired by, or largely inspired by, books that weren't spy novels.
Such as?
Well, such as like Lolita by Nabokov.
Yeah.
And I love really great writing and messy characters. So yeah, or An American Tragedy by Theodore Dreiser. It's another one of my favorites. And Rabbit Run by John Updike. So yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any other questions.
What about when you watch spy TV? So something like Homeland, for instance. As a former CIA agent, how do you view spy TV series? Or are there any that come close to real life?
You know, this is so awful, but I don't watch any spy shows on TV.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, no, does that sound terrible? I mean, so I don't know. The little snippets I've seen here and there aren't particularly realistic, but I haven't watched enough to comment.
Is that because you prefer to read rather than watch TV? Or you just
Mostly.
Yeah.
Mostly, but also the little I've seen seemed so unrealistic. It just didn't really interest me. You know what show I loved? It's not a spy show, but Babylon Berlin. Speaking of Berlin,
Yes.
have you seen the show?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was terrific.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites.
Got it. And the other thing that surprises me doing the Spybrary podcast is occasionally I get emails from probably former colleagues of yours that read spy fiction. And that surprises me because I think if I was working in the CIA or MI6, probably the last thing I'd want to read about is other spies, but it does hold an attraction.
Yeah, I think it does for sure. I mean, I don't remember when I read most of the spy novels, like whether I was in the CIA, I probably was, but I kind of read the classic spy fiction mostly. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I could stomach like the really modern shoot 'em up type spy novels. It's just not my thing and it's not as realistic. But yeah, no, I think like the classic spy novels, they sort of transcend the genre, you know, like to me, they're not really spy novels. They're just great novels. Like John le Carre, Graham Greene, you know, I mean, Joseph Cannon, like they're just great novels, period. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
To your question about the shows, you know, there are a couple movies that I think are pretty good. I just saw Beirut. Have you seen
that one? Oh,
yeah. No, I know it didn't really make a big splash, I think, with John Hamm.
Yeah.
It takes place in the Middle East and it has some really dark twists. And I found like the tradecraft was pretty realistic. So that's one I would recommend.
I will definitely look that up and I'll add that to show notes. Marvelous. Well, Ilana, I know you're very busy. thank you for coming on, Spybrary. Thank you also for being a member of our community. I'm sure you'll get some more questions from some of our listeners who have enjoyed today's conversation. And as I say, I don't say this easily either, but best read 2023. It's definitely going to make the top 10 of our favorite spy books this year. And something else was quite funny. So on July 4th, I put out an image basically saying Happy Independence Day, of course, but also, here's 4 great American spy writers. Because there's always this kind of joke and banter within the Spybrary community. The Brits write better realistic spy novels and the Americans write the flashbang stuff, Kalashnikov kiddery. But there's more and more of you Americans coming through. So Vidic, McCloskey, Vesperman, McCloskey, yeah. And now you and Alma Katsu, because Paul Vidic told me off. He said, you've got to put Alma and Alana on that image. And I'm like, well, I have to read the book first, Paul.
Yeah. No, I know Alma. She's great. I know her. Yeah. That's such a compliment, honestly. But I kind of agree with you. I tend to like British spy novelists better. Yeah. Is that treason to say that?
No, not at all. Not at all. But Alana, thanks a million for coming on.
Thank you. This was such an honor. Honestly, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Spybrary podcast. You don't have to wait for the next episode. Join the conversation happening now at facebook.com/Spybrary and on Twitter @Spybrary.